To help us deconstruct and disambiguate, to help us leave details bare this morning from the headlines would be Gbubemi Atimomo. Good morning, Gbubemi.
Good morning, Omas. Good morning, Lagos.
And I also got Mr. C here with me, helping us break it down. Good morning, Mr. C.
Good morning, Omas. Good morning, good morning, Lagos.
And so we proceed now to grab the copy of the headlines this morning from starting with Gbubemi this morning to help us understand what this one is saying from the Premium Times this morning. And here it is telling us that President Tinubu departs Abuja for Riyadh Thursday to attend Saudi Arabia summit. That's what it's saying. So there we go. The president is off again. And are we likely to see returns when the president come back in terms of the much needed investments?
Okay, so the president is billed to attend the Saudi Africa conference in Saudi Arabia. Part of the motivation for attending the conference is to seek support for joint action, political coordination, addressing regional security threats, facilitating economic transformation. Basically, we're looking for economic support. The motivation is also to seek more like partnerships rather than seeking debt. So foreign direct investments, looking for ways within which Saudi and Saudi companies can invest in Nigeria. That would also be the motivation for, I assume, for the other African countries attending this conference as well. But there appears to be a bit of I'm not sure that the right word to use is confusion, because I see that some other newspapers are reporting that that conference has been postponed because of the Israeli-Palestinian situation. It appears as though other news reporters are reporting that the conference has been postponed because Saudi Arabia is convening an emergency Arab and Islamic conference so that they can discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I'm not quite sure, and it categorically states that this conference has been postponed to a later date, which will be announced. So I'm not quite sure if this news needs to be updated by the presidency or if there's another communication saying that the conference is back on. I guess the president's spokesperson will need to provide us an update on that. But eventually, whenever the president does attend the conference, I expect that he should be able to meet with key business leaders in Saudi Arabia, key officials, and hopefully find points of synergy between Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states, and seek for avenues within which investments can be made in Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much, Gbubemi, for that submission, and hoping to hear from the presidency very soon, especially the spokesperson as regards what the future of that summit would be from our end. Let's get now to Mr. C this morning. Mr. C, the Daily Post is what you're staring at this morning, and the headline there screams, Abuja court admits Godwin Emefiele to bail after 151 days in the hands of the DSS, and then tossed away to the EFCC, and then moved to court. And then here we have it. The man is walking home, at least to be produced back in court. How did this all happen?
Okay, thank you, Mas. So yesterday, the Federal High Court granted the embattled former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria bail. Now, this is the latest bail order that favor. One was initially made when he was in custody of the DSS, but that was never agreed. Now, the judge in granting bail yesterday pointed out the fact that he had been in custody for 151 days. The federal government had preferred charges against him as far back as August, meaning they had concluded the investigations and were confident of the case they had put forward against him. Therefore, there was no continued basis for continuing to keep him in detention. But what is interesting is the arguments put forward by the lawyers to the Attorney General of the Federation, suggesting that if he was released on bail, he would interfere with his proposed arraignment on the 15th of November That is Wednesday next week. Now, that is truly ridiculous because beyond that assertion, there was no material provided to show how he would interfere with that arraignment. Now, the larger picture is this. Yes, he's been granted bail. He was granted bail and he was released to the custody of his lawyer, Mr. Matthew Booker, and Mr. Matthew Booker was enjoined to produce him when the arraignment is ready. Beyond all of this, this is where we're going, and this is a larger picture. Nigerian governments, irrespective of whatever time or year, continue to disrespect and disregard the constitutional rights of their citizens. If you believe a Nigerian citizen or a foreigner resident in Nigeria has committed a crime, for the love of everything good, do your investigations before you haul the person off to court. That is the proper procedure, and that is the procedure we see followed in properly run countries. Now, there is no basis for holding him for 151 days. He wasn't a security threat. Yes, people were upset with Naira design policy, but is that enough justification to hold him for over 5 calendar months? Certainly not. Now, next week, they're proposing an arraignment. We look forward to the arraignment, and then we will see how prepared the government is with this case. Because if we follow previous cases or similar cases where they haul people into courts before investigations have been done, more often than not, those cases just peter out into obscurity.
Well, thank you very much. We wait for the days ahead to see how it pans out. And that takes me to Gbubemi this morning. The Punch newspaper is on the stand, and we see that it runs with the headline, Afenifere insists on state police and true federalism. We are back to this conversation once again, and just walk us through what's the basis for this proposal. And this proposition isn't new to the Afenifere group, but why has this become a major news headline this morning?
Okay, Afenifere is a pan-Yoruba socio-political organization. They've been around for maybe about 60 or so years or more. You know, they pride themselves as the elite of politically aware Yoruba people, and they've been at the forefront of championing, should I say, Yoruba rights, within the country, whilst also pushing for true federalism, which is one of the things that they've called for now. So it's not surprising that they're making this call again for state police. If we recall, once we got back into democracy in 1999, state police was one of the things that a lot of people agitated for, especially, the southwestern nation. The argument was that state governments needed to be fully in charge of their police, rather than the police being under a national body, whereas they receive their instructions from Abuja, so to speak. Now, so what we have is a situation where the governor of a state doesn't really have the powers to be able to instruct police on action. So for me, the cries for state police are valid. However, some other people have also cited, that governors can abuse the opportunity and all of that. I'm not sure that the pros outweigh the cons. But for me, what is most valid is the call for a true federalism, a situation whereby the states can take charge, take responsibility for their own, revenue, take responsibility for their own security, rather than having to rely on Abuja all of the time. With this sort of situation, we'll get to see which states are really viable, which states should really be in business, which states should not be in business. So back to calls for security police. So one of the things that, in my opinion, is key about the concept of a state police is the fact that ideally, if we look at, other nations that we try to adapt to, the UK, the US, they have a situation whereby the police is close to home. So, the police officers, are typically residents within the community. They come out of the community. They're people that are known. What we have is a situation whereby someone who, for example, was born and brought up in Lagos, attends police college, and then is posted to, let's say, Kaduna. So you go to Kaduna, you don't know anybody, nobody knows you, it takes a bit of time before you build your identity there, before you can begin to, have your own understanding of the community, build sources, all that sort of thing. So that's probably part of what is affecting the police. Let's not even look at the issues of bureaucracy. So for me, that part is valid. So to be able to get to the point of having a state police, if we ever get to that point, we would need a constitutional amendment because the constitution does not support that. That is not impossible. That would be a call for the National Assembly to push. I believe that what Afenifere should be doing is also highlighting these to the National Assembly and pressuring them to be able to do something about it. So they would first need to initiate a bill, obviously, and pass it on to the National Assembly to consider, if they're really serious about this. But the calls are quite valid because, like I said, we have a situation whereby security situations around various parts of the country are quite alarming. Some of these things could be prevented if proper intel was received. But like I said, if someone has, been born, brought up and trained in one part of the country and deployed to another part of the country, they may not necessarily speak the language, they may not understand the culture. Therefore, people may not trust them with information, that may be necessary for them to be able to address some of these security situations and preempt them in that case. So there's that likelihood of that, A state police probably would counter that because it would say it would largely depend on recruiting people who have grown up, born, grown up, developed within the communities, whether they are from the community or not. At least they have an understanding of the community because they reside in that community.
Okay,
I'd
so
also
quickly,
just like, okay, I'd also just like, yeah, I'd also
go
just
ahead,
like
just sum up.
just like to add to that as well that, so this call for a state police, is just a call for feeds into the larger discussion about the call for the revamp of the constitution, which I think is very key. We've had a few constitutional amendments over time, but I think it's time that we actually sat down and looked at the constitution from top to bottom, to be able to find out what works and what doesn't work.
All right. So, but you've spoken to the first leg of the demand or proposition. That's also, I'd like you to speak to the call for true federalism and knowing if for someone standing by saying, so what's wrong with the nature of federalism we've got right now?
Okay, so that's part of why I was leaning towards a constitutional amendment, because the constitution right now, I would say it has a modicum of federalism attached to it, which is what we call ourselves the Federal Republic of Nigeria. But in the spirit and truth of it, it does not. Because, for example, we have a situation whereby, let's take oil, for example, revenue from the oil is passed on to the federal government. The federal government, gives the oil generating states a derivation fee, and then shares the proceeds across amongst all of the states in the country. So whether they have any inputs into it or not, they get a cut. In a true federal situation, that would not happen because each state would be responsible for generating their own income, and then they would be the ones to pass on an amount to the federal government. So the activities of the federal government would be severely pared down, and the states would be, the power blocks be responsible for what happens within their states, so to speak.
Thank you very much, Gbubemi. Let's drift away and talk money matters. You just set up the pace for the next set of conversation for Mr. C. The Vanguard is next, and it's here. It's saying old Naira note, the old and the new Naira notes remain legal tender. And that's what the circular issued by the CBN on Wednesday seemed to come out to give reassurance to Nigerians. But why has there been this unease and this news back and forth about this currency going out of use?
Okay, thank you. So let me answer the question. As we recall, when the Naira design policy information was launched, we were told that all denominations of the 200 Naira, the 500 Naira notes, and the 1,000 Naira notes would no longer be legal tender, and newly redesigned notes would be legal tender. Now, however, all that was put in hold just before the election, and we were told that the current dispensation will last until December. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're in November. This is the second week of November, and trust our authorities, irrespective of the year or party affiliation, to be uncomfortably silent about this issue. And this has led to speculation that the old notes are no longer legal tender, we're only using the newly resigned notes. And that's what informed the central bank statement yesterday, that the old Naira notes and the new Naira notes are still legal tender by virtue of Section 20, subsection 5 of the CBN Act of 2007. Now, that is all well and good, and it enjoins Nigerians to continue to accept both notes, and that it is illegal and unlawful to reject your note. But this is the bigger picture. The government needs to come out with a clear decision on what is the way forward, because that initial deadline still stands. And unless it is revoked or further amended, one way or the other, we need to keep the people posted so that they know what to do. And then this will put to bed all the unnecessary speculation and rumors.
Just before we let the Naira old and new Naira note issue go to bed once again, but now, isn't it in the place of the CBN to handle anything relating to financial policy and regulation? Do we need the federal government to speak on it?
Well, ideally, the CBN is supposed to be independent and is supposed to be in charge of monetary policy. Now, that's the ideal, that's the theoretical. In reality, especially in a country like Nigeria, that is not exactly the case. So they must still take their very movement directions from the president directly or indirectly. And it will be quite embarrassing for this administration if the CBN were to announce one direction only for the federal government to come back and announce a contrary direction. So they need to sit down, back channels, and confirm what the position is or present their position. And if the administration is in support of it, then it gets announced.
Okay, so quickly, we'd like to let you know we'll be reading your messages, reacting to the headlines we're serving you on Freshly Pressed this morning. Please let them come over to the WhatsApp platform on 0809-444-0981. You can also leave us a message on youtube.com/smooth981 FM Lagos. We're streaming live. You can see us there also. So let's get it going. I still got Gbubemi Atimomo here with me and Mr. C. My name is Omatseye Atsenuwa. Gbubemi Atimomo, let's pick up this pace with the Daily Post newspaper, where it says here, Tinubu assures national population census will hold in Nigeria soon. But then, how soon is soon? And knowing that the last administration also had a plan to get it done, would there ever be a political will, and then will politics be divorced from getting the true number of how many we are in Nigeria?
We have to do that census. If we recall, the last administration of President Muhammadu Buhari had approved the census and in fact had set about, I think, 3 different dates. So they set a date, postponed and postponed up until, I think the last date was supposed to be May 3rd to the 5th or so, sometime around that period. You know, we had discussed several times the practicality of holding the census around elections, you know, which was when the initial dates were set and then was postponed and then postponed again. Now, in the midst of all of this, you know, a huge sum of money had been released to the National Population Commission to buy equipment. In fact, we ended up discovering that they had been given the money to order equipment, you know, and there was no way the equipment would have come by the time of the last scheduled date. By which time also they had also started training people or preparing to train people. So a lot of money had been released for this census, which is why I said the census must hold. You know, my expectation obviously is that we're not going to be seeing new monies dedicated to the census, although I don't know if that is wishful thinking, considering the fact that a lot of time, you know, has passed from the last scheduled date. So what we really need is not just the president to say that it will be held soon. You know, we need some sort of definitive timeline, considering the fact, like I said before, that there were dates originally set for these things. You know, the president has been in office for about 6 months now. I'd like to believe that that's one of the things that was clearly handed over from the last administration. You know, if if really, we were just a few steps away from holding the population census at the last scheduled date, then there's no reason why we shouldn't have a firm date by now. I believe sorry?
No, just before I like you to also factor in that there were enumerators who had even gone around to mark buildings, and they were built in places already. So
exactly. So that's why I said, so people had been trained, funds had been dispersed, steps were already being taken, and I remember, in fact, the last postponement, which was postponed for to a date to be determined by the new administration, which is President Tinubu's, was literally just a few days before the last scheduled date, So as far as I consider at the time, the census, we were ready to hold the census. So considering all of that, there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't have a firm date by which we should hold this census. I believe the president should. Yeah.
He has something to say to that.
Okay, so I agree with Gbubemi about this, but two things. We ordered equipment to conduct the census. We have not gotten any news that equipment has arrived in Nigeria. That's the first thing. Two, when the budget for that census was prepared, especially with regards to the logistics subhead, what was the price of petrol? What is the price of petrol today? So it is very clear, even to the blind, that they're going to use money. The bigger question is, where is the money? Because the truth of the matter is, Nigeria doesn't have the sort of money we pretend to have. Forget the antics of our people in Abuja and the National Assembly. We simply don't have this money. Now, if those items have not come, what that means is prices would have gone up because the value of the Naira vis-a-vis the dollar has sufficiently gone down, and we're going to need more money, possibly to complete those purchases. So again, more money will be required. The bigger question is, where is this money coming from?
Okay. It looks like a fine place to see if some of the messages here would know where the money for census would come from. So I'll pick up a message from Ajayi Olonilua from Magodo, GRA Sherry. Afenifere is right to insist on the state police and true federalism. What is at the core of the call for restructuring of the country's administration since 1999, when the military designed the constitution was imposed on the country? That's Ajayi Olonilua's thoughts this morning. And that takes me safely to find IOS_Lagos message. And then it goes on, it is important that we put it clear that Emefiele was not held in custody for Naira redesign policy. Capital, no. There are clear cases of misappropriation and policy tampering that impacted the functioning of the CBN. We must not water down the cases that has been pushed before the court. Mr. C, you picked up that story, so this is...
I'm not sure I understand the question. I never said he was taken to court because of the Nigerian policy. And what I did say concerning the cases was that the federal government had preferred charges against them as far back as August. What that means is that they have concluded or seemingly concluded the investigations, and it was on the back of that that the court granted him bail.
Okay. So that looks like also getting on to Dami from Ikeja saying, from a good governance perspective, rule of law and human rights perspective, the government has been completely irresponsible in its handling of the former CBN governor. From a consideration of how Godwin Emefiele handled his portfolio, it's just Karma doing what she does, taking it all together. Now government picking, they pursue government picking. Fair play to all of them. That's how he puts it. So that will give me enough time to come back in a while to pick up some more messages if they do come in on 0809-444-0981. And that would mean, Mr. C, this one is electricity related and production. So Lagos State government plans stable electricity for Imota rice mill. How crucial is this for this infrastructure in Lagos?
Okay, thank you, Les. So the Lagos State government had invested a lot of money in setting up the Imota rice mill. And that Imota rice mill is supposed to produce a certain quantity of rice every year, which will help in reducing the supply, the demand requirements from Nigerians for rice, locally made rice. However, it has since been discovered that it turned out that public power supply was inefficient for the plant. So they've now installed backup power supplies from a 33 kVA inverter to other equipment just to ensure that the rice mill has electricity round the clock when it should be producing. Now, this is a step in the right direction, and if they can extend it to other facilities or other production facilities owned by the government, this will increase the revenue generated by the government, and then we can then see more social infrastructure being provided by the government.
Okay. So let's final paper now, wrap up and go over to Gbubemi Atimomo. Let's get the Vanguard before you now and discovered mass grave in Anambra marked for forensic investigation. This isn't somewhere in Rwanda for a marked grave to be discovered. Gbubemi, walk us through this story and what exactly, how, they came about this.
Okay, so a few weeks ago, if you recall, a mass grave was discovered in Anambra State. It was quite shocking because people wondered, what led to that. It was not an official grave site, it was not, it wasn't any official anything, so everybody had wondered, what led to this, if we also recall, there's been quite a lot of security issues in the Southeast. A lot of people have now alluded to this mass graves as being connected with the violence and security issues around the Southeast. The governor of Anambra State, Chukwuma Soludo, Professor Chukwuma Soludo, had set up Truth, Justice, and Peace Commission sometime last year to make inquiries into the security situations and restiveness within the state. And now people are, they've called quite a number of witnesses over the period. So this is about a year and this is about 15 months, since the commission was put together, and they interviewed quite a number of people to be able to get their perspective on the security situation around the state, and they've collected evidence. So now this grave site, has now been sealed for forensic investigation. I'd really like to know what kind of forensics would go into it, considering that we don't really have a national database linked with our fingerprints, dental records, all of that. At best, they may be able to connect some of the bones, with some missing persons, but that would really, really take a lot. I'm not quite sure what exact forensic methods will be used to identify this, but it's quite clear, though, that the mass grave and the issues of violence in Southeast are linked. I'm hoping that eventually, with proper investigations, we can find out the people who are behind this.
But just quickly before I let you go, because you talked about not having a database, but just to put it out there that, of course, the NRN is already, just because not everybody might have been captured, but that in itself is a database where fingerprints and all of those identity issues were supposed to be captured if we started way back in time.
Exactly.
So let's pick up our messages in here from Tunji, and he says, good morning. Well, I don't know, Mr. C, they really need to hear you. Because he's watching from YouTube and we care about campuses very, very well. So Tunji, thanks very much for the observation. And then we'll get over to Nedu saying, federal government told us that he was held for holding a gun without permission, nothing else. Chinedu said that. Then Kende comes up with rice production in Lagos. Oh, you've never heard of Lake rice before? Now, even this rice you didn't know of in Mota. Please, who will produce the paddy rice? Where have you been, Kende? But then we don't have enough farmers to produce paddy rice that will be milled. Don't let us deceive ourselves. Well, that's a wrap on the show this morning. I want to say thank you to Gbubemi Atimomo for your time.
Thank you, Max. It's been a pleasure.
And I want to say thank you very much to Mr. C for your time also.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who sent in their messages and those who listened. Join me in about 14 minutes when it will be time for the Grapevine, and we've got new music. Don't miss out on it. Stay tuned. A smooth 98.1 FM. Good morning.
Everything.
Bye.